talk about domestic abuse, we often think of control, manipulation, and fear. But not everybody realises how gambling can sit at the heart of that cycle. Gambling-related domestic abuse happens when gambling becomes a trigger, a tool, or a weapon in abusive relationships. It can start with hidden debts or missing money and spiral into control, coercion, and sometimes violence. Welcome to the Gambling Harms and Domestic Abuse Resource for Housing Professionals podcast. I'm Natasha Devon. In this series, we're exploring the intersection between gambling harms and domestic abuse, part of a project funded by the Gambling Commission and led by Mercy Denedo from Durham University, in a partnership with Amanze Ejiogu from Sheffield Hallam, Chibuzo Ejiogu from Cranfield University, Katy Brookfield from Nottingham University, and Liz Riley from Betknowmore UK, as well as Kelly Henderson from Addressing Domestic Abuse. This is the second episode in our Gambling Harms and Domestic Abuse series, with a particular focus on housing. In this episode, we're joined by survivor of gambling-related domestic abuse, who we're calling Jane, although that's not her real name. And she's sharing her lived experience of how her partner's gambling affected her and her daughter's lives. Today, we'll explore her journey, the challenges she faced, and the support that she accessed along the way. This is a personal and sensitive story, and Jane has been very generous in letting us share it. I'm also joined by a member of the research team, Dr. Liz Riley from Betknowmore UK. Liz, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Please note that this episode contains references to domestic abuse, violence, and gambling harms, which some listeners may find distressing. Please look after your well-being, and we'll share details of support services at the end of the programme. So if I can come to you first, Jane, thank you so much for being here with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about your life before these experiences began?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me along and for giving me the opportunity to not only share my story, but also being able to hopefully help many people out there who are currently going through what I went through. My life was pretty much the same as any other person out there. You met a person, fell in love, what you thought was love, lived together, got married, had a child. But in the back of your head, you always know that something's not quite right, but you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to say anything because you are frightened of saying something that's going to cause a reaction, because that reaction's then going to cause something else, and then you don't know what the repercussions are going to be. But my partner, who then became my husband, always had a gambling, I would say, problem, because whenever we wanted to go out anywhere, it was always where he wanted to go, and the evening always ended up being in a casino. Or whenever we went on holiday, it always had to be somewhere where he wanted to go, which had gambling facilities available to him. So my life was led by him and dictated to by him, and very much became the focus was about gambling and money going missing and my life being restricted with money and him holding the purse strings.
And was there a particular moment when you noticed your husband's gambling habits or thought that they were in a territory where you described them as a problem?
I don't think there was a light bulb moment as such. I think it became more noticeable when my daughter was born. I sort of put his behaviour becoming worse down to him. I thought he was jealous of the fact that it was no longer me and him. And I thought he was maybe a bit jealous that there was a child in the mix now that was getting more of the attention. I didn't realise that he worked from home a lot of the time, so he had access online gambling. I didn't realise he was doing that. I knew he did the lottery, but I didn't realise that he was upstairs in his office online gambling. maybe the light bulb moment came when, if there was such a moment, when I was on a holiday with him and you get your hotel bill comes under the door before you check out,
Mm.
and the statement um, showed that he had gambled um, £18,000 in 1 week. Um, and that was an absolutely massive shock because I knew that we actually didn't have that money to be able to gamble that. Um, when I mentioned it to him, it was a mistake. It was the wrong bill. It wasn't ours. That never happened. How could he have done that? I was always there with him. Well, I knew he wasn't always there with me. Um, so there was an opportunity for that to have happened. Um, but then again, things in the house had started to turn into paperless. We weren't getting statements through. So I couldn't see what was going on. I wasn't in the house all the time because I would have to do school runs. Um, but then I realized when enough became enough and I wasn't putting up with it anymore, when I realized that my daughter was old enough to be able to talk and tell her truth and people would listen to her, that was the time that I needed to make her safe and safeguard her and myself, and we had to get out. And that's when I realized just how big the gambling was with him. And that's when I realized that he had took out credit cards, bank loans, gambling, all these things had been taken out in my name. And I was then left with all of that debt that he had taken out. Um, and he had took all of my savings and all of my daughter's savings and premium bonds and a lot more.
And what about the impact emotionally? What was the atmosphere like in your house while all of this was going on?
The atmosphere in the house was horrendous all of the time. It was not a loving family environment. We never did anything as a family. Even going on holiday wasn't as a family. It was me and my daughter doing things, and he would be off doing his own thing. In the house, it was awful. I always remember there was two occasions when one was an advert on the TV and the other one was a storyline in Coronation Street. Am I meant to say at this point that there are other series on the TV? Um, in Coronation Street, there was a storyline running where a lady called Yasmin was suffering at the hands of her husband, domestic abuse, coercive controlling behaviour. And this guy, Jeff, was going around the house putting marks around the house to see if she was cleaning the house and playing with her mind and all of those sort of things. And that was exactly what my husband was doing.
Mm.
He was controlling me and he would say that I wasn't cleaning the house. He was putting marks on the ceramic hob or on the cooker hood. And if he came into the kitchen and he could see the slightest mark still visible where he had wrote clean me on something, he would say I hadn't cleaned it enough and he would make an extra mess. They poured like a tomato based sauce on the bench to make sure that I had to clean it all up. So the relationship in the house and the atmosphere in the house was just horrendous. You were always waiting for an argument to start. I would wake up in the morning and think, is today going to be a good day? Or is today going to be the day that we actually have another argument? And my daughter suffered that all the time, and it was worse during lockdown. Horrendous.
That's a really good point, actually, that the impact that lockdown must have had, where you actually aren't allowed to leave your house for any great length of time. In terms of the financial control that you were experiencing, you've touched a little bit on how your partner was using credit cards and loans and debts. But what was the moment when you realized that you were being dragged into all of this?
He was quite switched on. I'm not going to say he was a clever person because he wasn't. He thought he was clever, but he wasn't clever. A facility online called moneysupermarket.com,
Hmm.
where you can actually create an account, and on there you can check to see what your credit facility is like and the ability to get credit cards or loans and stuff like that. He created two accounts, one for himself and one for me. His credit rating and score was so bad because he was maxed out on everything. And when I got with him, he had debt, but he always said that that was from his previous marriage and how she had got all this debt and he had been left with it. So I just assumed that he had that debt and he was still chipping away at paying it off. But what he would do is he would get all these promotional offers that came out with the credit cards or the banks, um, 0% balance transfers. Um, you know, you could have a credit card and you'd have all of this for like no interest and all every offer that was on the table he would go for. So he had maxed himself out on everything that he was able to get. So then he created me an account on this money supermarket. Um, but he fraudulently did it because on there he had put on that I was working and that I had a big salary and then it was supported by extra income off my partner. And it was all false information that he had put on there. But that facilitated him to then be able to see what credit I could then get
Hmm.
or loans and stuff like that. So then I found out later he was then applying for these credit cards or loans from there, getting them, and then he was just constantly transferring money and moving money around between those cards and everything. When I found out that that's what he was doing, it was when Virgin Money, an application came through where he had applied for a £20,000 bank loan, I think it was, and the paperwork had come through in the post. Normally, I'm not in the house to receive the post, but I had come back early, or the postman must have been late, took the post off him, and I opened the letter addressed to myself. Congratulations, thank you for applying for your loan. You've been successful. The paperwork's here for you to sign. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I haven't applied for a loan. I don't need a loan. If I hadn't needed any money, the first people I would have went to were my parents. I was so close to my parents.
Hmm.
I would have, if I needed anything, I would have gone and asked them. Um, so I went and spoke to him and I said, this has come through and I've never applied for anything. Made out that I was stupid. Um, it wasn't a loan that I had applied for. It was telling me I had been selected and if I wanted it, I could have it. And I said, no, this quite clearly states that I've applied for it. I've gone through the checks and everything, and it's been approved. I've got to send that back and keep this one. Anyway, he didn't agree. And I said, well, I tell you what, if this is not meant to be an approved loan and it's been a mistake, I'll just rip it up now and then that's it. And that's what I did. But then that had just really heightened the suspicions that I already had.
Hmm.
And I thought, no, this is no good. I mean, if I went out to the shop or anything, if I was in the shop, I would get a phone call. What you doing in the supermarket? And you would sort of say the name of where I was, and I would say, well, how do you know I'm in here? Well, I've had an alert on my phone.
Hmm.
So he knew where I was. He was tracking where I was all the time. And it was because we were meant to have a joint account, which I later found out it wasn't a joint account. It was his account that I was named on. And basically, how he was committing all of the fraud was by having the remote access on my computer. taking the money from my account when he was getting the bank loans. It was coming straight into my account. Because he had the remote access, he would go on, he knew all the passwords, he would take it straight out of my bank and move it straight into the joint account. And of course, I wouldn't see because I wasn't expecting it. Everything was paperless, so I knew nothing about it. And then my credit card was always at a low level of 3,000. I had contacted them and said, I don't need you to automatically put it up. I don't need a big credit card. But then obviously when I left them and I was changing everything over and I was putting everything back onto paper and not paperless, I was shocked when I found out that my credit card had been put up to 17,500 and it was maxed out.
And there's so much that you're describing here that has happened to you, whether it's the coercive control or the gaslighting, the financial abuse. What impact did that have on your mental health?
Well, I'm absolutely not ashamed to say that my mental health was seriously impacted and I am still on medication for that. Yeah, one day I would absolutely love to be able to come off the medication. I don't know when that time will be, um, because even though he knew my mental health was being impacted by it and I was starting to have panic attacks, I thought I was having a heart attack because I didn't know what it was. And it was my little girl who said, "Don't worry, mommy, I know how to ring for the ambulance," because he said it was nothing and he wasn't going to call for help. So yeah, I have got mental health problems, um, and I have gone and got help. The doctor was absolutely amazing. My GP, he stood by me, he helped me, he listened, he got me in touch with something called Talk and Change, I think it was called, um, who are the mental health team at the surgery, and I worked with them and talked things through. So I never ever want anybody to feel who's going through what I've gone through. If they're going through it, never be ashamed to admit that your mental health is being impacted by what you've gone through.
In hindsight, when you look back on everything that's happened to you and your journey, do you wish that you had received some advice or some support? What could have happened earlier, do you think?
Well, I mean, the police were no help at all. With regards to the gambling, I mean, I see a lot of adverts on the TV and I see the Gambling UK up in the top right hand corner when these adverts come on and they've got TV stars talking about gambling and gambling wisely and everything. An individual who's got a gambling problem or who likes to gamble and doesn't see themselves as having a problem, if they don't recognize that they are spending lots and lots of money gambling and it's having an impact on their loved ones, unless they know and recognize that there is a problem there, they'll never want help or admit that they need help. So, for the individual who gambles, I don't know how we can ever help a person that can't admit that they need help. But for me, as a surviving person who's gone through all of that, I wish I had never set eyes on that person in the first place. The only good thing that came out of it was my daughter, who I would never ever change for the world. I wish the police had been stronger.
Liz, listening to Jane's story there, what do you think that we need to understand better in terms of the link between domestic abuse and gambling harm?
I think Jane has described really well the financial and economic abuse that can result from a perpetrator's gambling and how that can be hidden. But I think coming out of the research that we've done, funded by the Gambling Commission, there was evidence of the full spectrum of domestic abuse related to gambling. So coercive control, emotional abuse, gaslighting, economic abuse, financial abuse, digital abuse, which Jane also described, sexual violence, physical violence, and post-separation abuse. So I think it's really important to understand that gambling harms do not just result in financial and economic abuse. Abuse can change over time as well. As a gambling problem develops, the abuse can become more serious. It can also come in waves. Sometimes it is totally hidden, and other times it just it ebbs and flows as the gambling problem escalates. And I think Jane has also described really well the mental health impacts of domestic abuse that results from gambling, but they can also have repercussions for physical health, for finances, employment, housing, relationships with family, and with wider communities as well. We spoke to women from minority backgrounds who who had to leave their communities in order to disclose gambling-related domestic abuse. And obviously, the impacts on children can be quite profound as well, not just when the domestic abuse and the gambling are happening, but for the long term, especially in terms of those financial repercussions, which can go on for many, many decades.
And we spoke a little bit in episode 1 about how it seems like the systems that are set up to support people, they only really ever had one issue in mind. So we can support you if you're experiencing domestic abuse or gambling harm or mental health issues, but sometimes don't take into account that these things can coexist altogether and can create quite a complex picture for the individuals that are going through them. How do you think the system can adapt to reflect that?
I mean, the system is siloed. We see the particular harm or problem that we as an agency are tasked with resolving. So I think that across multiple sectors, we need to get much better at looking at those links between problems, of developing the curiosity to if somebody is disclosing to you that they are experiencing domestic abuse in whatever form that takes, of asking questions to try and find out if there is anything behind that domestic abuse that also would trigger the need for further support, whether that's for the perpetrator or for the victim survivor, of really starting to unpick some of the stories that people are hearing. So it's not just the curiosity, but also the confidence that people need to ask questions. And one of the barriers to that is gambling is so normalized in our society that I think a lot of professionals find it almost very difficult to ask about it. It makes them feel uncomfortable. It's legal and it's normalized, and they don't know enough about the gambling harms and how gambling harms can relate to domestic abuse.
Mm. Jane, is there, looking back, anything that you wish that people understood more about the relationship between domestic abuse and gambling harm?
I do wish that there was more of an understanding about the fact of what the coercive control and behaviour is and what the impact that has, because I know it's becoming more of a discussed topic now, and there's more awareness about it, but I don't think there's enough knowledge really out there, and I don't think enough people understand that gambling has such a massive impact on people.
And what advice would you give to somebody else if they are currently going through what you've been through? What would you say to them?
There's a point where it becomes unhealthy when you can't do what you want to do, where you're being criticized for the way you look or what you're wearing, where you can't go and buy what you want to buy, where you haven't physically got your own money to be able to go and do what you want to do because somebody else is holding the purse strings. So if a person is out there and any of those things are starting to ring true with them, or their partner is secretive about the money, and you know that they're gambling, or you know that they're putting on too many scratch cards, or the lottery, or whatever, there's organizations out there that will be able to help them and will be able to protect them. And that's the thing that a lot of people are frightened about. They don't know who to go to. They don't know what's going to happen to them. If they walk out of that door today to leave their partner, the fear is, where do I go from here? And that's why a lot of them go back to where they've come from.
And that's a good moment, Liz, to ask you to remind the listeners where they can go to find some resources.
So we have a website, which is dagamblingharms.co.uk. On there is the series of podcasts that we've been recording, as well as a really useful resource for housing professionals, but also professionals from other sectors, which is around how to recognise gambling-related domestic abuse, how to respond to it, and where referrals can be made for multiple sorts of support, not just in the immediate crisis situation, but for longer term support as well.
Thank you so much, Jane, for sharing your story. I really appreciate it and you being with us today. And thank you, Liz, for being in the studio and sharing some of your expert perspective on this. If you've been affected by anything we've discussed today, support is available. You can contact the National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 247 or the National Gambling Helpline on 8020 133 for free, and they will direct you to local support services. I'm Natasha Devon. Thank you for listening.